All around the world, people depend on rivers, lakes, and streams as a source of fresh water, whether it be drinking, irrigation, or for industrial purposes. As a result, we want this water to be clean, as otherwise it's either unsafe or just unusable for what we need to use it for in general. But what if I told you that there were more ways that water can be unsafe than just trash and toxic waste? In fact, there are several ways that fresh water can be unsafe, and many of them are far more subtle than trash floating in it. Now, before we get into polluted water, I'd appreciate you to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay tuned for future content. Okay, so first let's look at the obvious stuff, that being trash. Very often, when you watch a river that flows through a city for long enough, you start to notice things like plastic waste and other artificially made debris float downstream, though it varies depending on the city and where you are within it. So, how does this trash end up in the stream? Well, there are a few different ways that this can happen. The easiest way is for someone to leave something like a plastic bag just laying on the street, and then a windstorm happens that carries the plastic bag through the city and eventually landing in the river. In addition, rain can wash trash down the storm drain, and in many cities, storm drains open right up into a local stream. Given how often people just casually litter, this happens numerous times every single day, especially given how densely populated many cities are close to their main river or lake. But there's another way that trash ends up in a river, and that's through what's known as a landfill. Landfills are essentially where everything that you don't recycle ends up. After you drop whatever you want to throw away in the trash can, it will eventually get collected and carried away in a huge truck, which will take it out to a trash disposal site. Since nobody wants anything to do with the trash anymore, it just gets dumped into these huge piles called landfills. From there, wind or rain can move the trash around, and it might eventually end up in a body of water. In addition, waste might fall out of the trash can or truck that's transporting it, and it can thus reach your local river in the same way. Now, plastic pollution is talked about a lot when it comes to the ocean, especially when talking about notable features like the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, an area of trash filled ocean that's twice the size of Texas. Pollution in rivers and lakes does end up in the ocean eventually, but how does it affect the rivers themselves? Well, if there's so much trash that you can barely even see the water, it will of course have a drastic effect on the aquatic environment, such as reducing photosynthesis and just making the water significantly dirtier in general. However, if it's just a handful of pieces of trash floating downstream on the surface of the water every now and then, the impact isn't going to be too huge, though it should still be cleaned up whenever possible. But what about pollution that is both much harder to detect with the unaided eye and is more harmful to the aquatic environment in general? Well, there is another thing that we can look at, the nutrients in the water. When you think of the word nutrient, food often comes to mind, as the nutrient balance that food has is important in determining whether it's healthy or unhealthy for you. But what exactly is a nutrient? Simply put, it is a substance that is vital to the growth and maintenance of life. So basically anything that helps animals, plants, and other organisms survive and thrive. These nutrients can be elements, molecules, compounds, or whatever, as long as they actively help organisms grow in some way, shape, or form. Now you might be thinking, if there are a lot of nutrients in the water, that's a good thing, right? After all, nutrients help stimulate life, so if there's more nutrients, the ecosystem should be better off. Well, the problem is, in the case of water, excessive nutrients tend to help one type of organism, algae. You may have heard of massive algae blooms popping up around the world before, particularly when it comes to the warm tropical waters off the Florida Gulf Coast, where it is commonly known as red tide and poses serious health risks to people swimming in or near it. Algae blooms can also pop up in fresh water, and when they do occur, they can cause some devastating impacts to the surrounding ecosystem. For instance, they can cause a major decrease in the amount of free oxygen dissolved in the water, essentially limiting many organisms' access to it, as well as making it harder for other underwater plants to do photosynthesis by blocking out the sun. When a body of water has an abundance of nutrients, this creates the perfect recipe for algae to grow, as it allows it to outcompete other organisms that want the same nutrients. But how exactly do these nutrients end up in the water? Well, there are three main ways. The first is runoff from fertilizer that is used in farms and lawns. This fertilizer contains a lot of nutrients, and when it rains, it's not hard for that fertilizer to run off into a nearby creek, increasing the amount of nutrients in it. In addition, nutrients can come from discharge from septic tanks, which contain a lot of biological components in them and are thus nutrient heaven. Finally, nutrients can arise from combustion, which can happen in numerous different ways, but generally pretends to produce the same materials every time. So, what can be done to prevent water pollution? Well, there are many things that you specifically can do to make sure our rivers, lakes, and oceans are cleaner. You could say to just don't litter, but if your trash ends up in a landfill anyway, then it ultimately won't make a huge difference whether or not you drop your plastic bag on the street or make sure it ends up in a landfill, since either way, there's a decent chance it will end up in the local water supply anyway. Instead, it's better to just not throw things away as much. This can be accomplished by the so-called 3 R's of reduce, reuse, and recycle. Simply put, you want to reuse things as much as possible, recycle things that can be recycled, such as cans and bottles, and reduce how much you use things that get thrown away after only one use. By doing all of these, you help decrease the amount of garbage that ends up in your local landfill, which means less trash that can leak out and damage the surrounding environment. But what about nutrient pollution? Well, unfortunately, many of the things that cause nutrient pollution, such as septic tanks in agricultural farmland, are either managed by the city or by companies that use these facilities. It is largely up to these entities to limit how much pollution comes out of them, and in some places, that doesn't really happen. However, there are a few things that you can do to help, at least on a smaller scale. For one, it's a good idea to not use fertilizer in your lawns or gardens, as that can get washed away during rainstorms and eventually end up in the river. This is more effective if done on a large scale, like a farm, but every little bit helps. In addition, since combustion can cause the release of excess nutrients, it's definitely a good idea to burn less stuff. This goes beyond water pollution, as burning can not only release harmful greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, it can also severely damage the surrounding environment if it's done in the wrong spot. Overall, while river pollution is very finicky and hard to spot, there are ways that it can be mitigated, and doing so helps create a safer, cleaner planet for all of us. And that's all I had to say about polluted rivers. As always, I'd appreciate it if you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay tuned for future content. Thanks and have a great day.